I know that there will be a better tomorrow, and it's not far. We will be struggling this year, maybe next year, but there is a light after the tunnel, Minu. I'm believing in it. And when I look at my 4 kids, which is almost a whole basketball team, they are fueling this energy to me. They are my sparkles of hope as well. I want to build a better place for them. What will be our legacy?
Where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says rolling stones don't gather moss? Hello everyone, I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you.
At a time when the world stands at fragile crossroads, where climate justice is no longer a choice, but a demand, and where voices from the global south rise louder against corruption and exploitation, we find ourselves called to listen more deeply and act more boldly. From the forests of Madagascar and Brazil to global negotiation tables, citizens are pushing back against extractive systems, reclaiming their future, one movement at a time. Today I'm joined by Dr. Ketakandriyana Rafitoson, an extraordinary voice of truth and resilience, a political scientist, and a human rights defender from Madagascar. As Vice Chair of Transparency International, Kay has not only held power to account, but has also helped shape grassroots and global efforts to bring equity, transparency, and dignity back to the heart of governance. As you might know, Transparency International is a global coalition against corruption. Thanks for joining me today, Kay.
Thank you, Meenu, for the invitation. Hello, everyone. Glad to be with you today.
We begin where change always begins, with people and place. So, Kay, your journey as an activist, academic, and movement builder is deeply rooted in Madagascar. How did that begin?
Yeah, so it began in my early years from high school with me realizing that there are so many injustices within our society. I come from a family from a modest background, and my father died when I was only 11, so I have been raised by my mom, who taught me and my brother the sense of justice, but also the sense of efforts. And I found my mom struggling in this world, trying to make the end meet, of course, but also trying to really foster education as the key to everything. It's not evident in our society, which is corrupt, where the power of money is persistent and destroying a lot of things. I was maybe 15 when I started to think of the issues of social justice, like how to make this happen, not only for my family, but in our community. And all of this led me to read the book, The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which opened up my eyes and my mind to social questions in life and led me also to think about democracy. Democracy for me is really this, it's not only a political regime, it's really a status where everybody has equal rights, equal access to opportunities, and where there is this sense of justice, doing what is just at all times, and also the sense of integrity. So that's how it started. My friends and I launched a student newsletter at some point where we were in high school, and then we continued when joining the university, really wanting to deep dive on these questions of equality, democracy, etc. from our early perspectives, of course, creating social movements here in Madagascar to speak about democratization, youth and women empowerment as well. All of this continued all through the years. I'm still friends with the same friends, and we are continuing to fight together. The scope and the width of this fight for social justice have changed because we have steadily moved from only national matters to regional ones. Now I'm fighting on a global scale, fighting for integrity, transparency, everything that matters in building this better environment for everyone.
Thank you for sharing that. You are at the intersection of climate governance and people's power. Having said that, you just said that you started like that at that young age and it continued onwards, and from a local to a global platform. In your experience, how does it pan out? East, West, Global South? You've noticed any patterns? That would be interesting to see.
Yeah. So before I answer a question, I wanted to bring additional information about my engagement. Today, I'm leading, in addition to my volunteer role as the Vice Chair of Transparency International, I'm also the Executive Director of a global movement called Publish What You Pay, which is really fighting for climate justice and resource equity, especially in the extractive industry. The two roles are really complementing each other. This is a direct answer to your question, because through anti-corruption, we are trying to break these power dynamics and the flow of dirty money, the flow of influence between the global south and the global north. The global south has always been plundered, from the north and deprived from its resources. And this exact picture of power imbalance, we find it in the battle for natural resources governance today. Because we are at an era where climate change is a reality. We are all trying to find a way to mitigate it. And part of these mitigation measures is the energy transition, which is, the word shifting from the use of fossil fuel sources of energy to cleaner ones, renewable sources of energy. But for that energy transition to happen, there is the call on the global south to provide essential minerals, which are that's a theory at least, going to foster the energy transition. But in this quest of those, we call them either transition or critical minerals, these power imbalances is more heightened than ever, because most of the time the global south is only the provider of raw materials. And the global south have never really enjoyed the benefits from its own resources, I would say. And in all of these schemes, there is corruption and misgovernance because our rulers in the global south are greedy. Most of them, I will start with my country, Madagascar, most of them are only motivated by their personal or party gains without really thinking of common good or how to improve the life of the population. At the same time, from the global north, we don't perceive this genuine intention of a win-win scenario for the moment. And that's why, corruption, hidden deals, opacity, secrecy is feeding this power imbalance in the natural resource governance worldwide. And that's a dynamics that we need to break. Within Publish What You Pay, we are calling for a shared prosperity on a thriving planet. That's really the goal right now. How to make sure that everyone, especially in the global south, gain benefits from their own natural resources. We need a global framework for accountability and transparency, hence the link between the two, I would say.
But when we speak of Global South, I just mentioned, let me put two sentences together. It is generally said that countries rich in minerals are poor in justice. What does the justice system look like in the West then? Right now, where we are sitting, also what is happening in the United States of the world. What is justice then?
Yeah, so justice, is a multifaceted word, I would say. And let's be clear, I'm not saying that it's only the global south who is suffering from this power imbalance. Countries in the north also face a crisis in democracy, crisis also in the rise of the far right in many countries, which, makes us lose the sense of the common good, I would say. One of my motto is people before profit. And what we see right now is the reverse. It's always profit before people. And that's the same thing, whether in the North or in the South globally. So justice for me is really finding first a political and an economic model which will make us really use the resources that we have, may they be financial resources, human resources, or natural resources, in the profit of people, centered on people, and generating access, especially in the global south, generating access to the most basic survival needs: water, food, energy, healthcare. In the West, how can it translate? It's freeing up societies from those big men who want to rule their societies. We have seen the increase of many struggles around the world where civic space is shrinking. It's not only in the global south, like the freedom of speech is, I would say, threatened everywhere around the globe. And the good side of that is that people are starting again to unite and to resist, to claim that justice. So we can speak about social justice, redistributive justice in terms of benefits and profits. We can also speak about human justice, speaking about dignity, that's the kind of justice that I'm referring to. And justice also spans within an independent judiciary system, of course. The courts are meant to really set what is truth, what is right for populations across the globe. But when the judiciary is captured by the executive, there is no more separation of powers. And unfortunately, we are seeing this state capture occurring around the globe. This is because of corruption. Let's not forget this. Then, if judiciary is captured, there won't be justice as well. So you see the intertwining between all of these concepts. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is for decision makers to remember that there is one planet, there are human beings who deserve better, who deserve good governance, which goes beyond a simple motto or a simple box that you are ticking. It has to be reflecting in everything that we are doing. And last week I had really that good surprise of the International Court of Justice ruling on climate change, for instance. That was groundbreaking for me. That was a premiere in the history of humanity, because now climate change is really recognized as a global threat and governments have been prompted to act on it. So it shows a good pathway, but between what is written on paper and what is happening in reality, there is always a big gap, and it's up to us to fill up this gap.
Thank you for sharing that. While you were talking, you mentioned this wonderful word, dignity. When we say, generally, I would have thought theoretically, dignity and justice would equal to democracy, theoretically. That is where I would have put it if I had read it in books and lived a theoretical life. However, what we see nowadays across the globe, in terms of movement, in terms of corruption and threat to justice and dignity and freedom of speech is there, but there is also a threat to that freedom of speech from the bodies which supposedly govern. When we talk of this, in your role and in your experience, how would one tackle that? We are talking of governing bodies, ideally, who should be having the right definitions of justice and dignity and anti corruption. Exactly, those are the places where all of it begins, right? So, how do you go about governing those bodies?
Yeah, that's a crucial question that you are asking, Minu, because it's very right. Without the right systems in place, but also without the right individuals, the quest for dignity and for social justice and for transparency is very hard. One of the things that I have been always promoting through my various engagements is that we need to have individuals who are trained. As politicians, you have to be trained. You cannot improvise being a leader of a country where you will be dealing with millions of human lives if you are not properly trained. I'm thinking once again, because that's the closest example I can take. In our country, Madagascar, our president is a DJ, and he made a coup in 2009. And he's still there until now. He's not skilled for this job. I'm very sorry to state that so bluntly, but he's not a leader in the sense of governing a country. And we are suffering from that. And because of his personal ambitions and centralization of power, we are all suffering from it because his institutions are captured and cannot work properly. So that would be the first element for me, having skilled people leading a country or a governing body. The second thing is to find a way to make sure that citizens, that populations can really express themselves and choose their leader through clean elections. I completely know that democracy doesn't really lie within elections. There are many components for a democracy to work. But nonetheless, elections have been set to provide a way for democratic alternance. That means that no one is meant to stay in power for the entire life. There has to be change within the governance as well and the governing bodies, to allow the mindset to shift, but also progress to happen, and to avoid only one strand of thinking. We need multiple ways of shaping the world and pluralistic view and exercise of power. So when elections are captured or rigged, then the feeling and the voice from the citizens have been distorted. In 2024, last year, it was a big electoral year across the globe. That was a momentum to shape and change things, but we have seen that elections have been problematic everywhere. I'm thinking of Georgia, for instance. Here in Madagascar, we've been also struggling. Across Africa, we had troubles in Latin America, Europe, elsewhere. So we are facing an electoral crisis globally. We need to redefine and find a better way to make elections work, because that's the only way for the moment through which citizens can express themselves and make a political choice. They cannot choose the right person if we don't have clean elections. That's the second thing. Third thing, we need to build citizen pressure. And this is where people power comes in. We need to organize and resist despite all of these difficulties, despite the repression, despite also the shrinking civic space. We need as citizens to get together and to reclaim the power in the sense that we want it, because we deserve better. So I sense a lot of fear from citizens facing repression. I can understand this because we are are not meant to face things without fear. We are not skilled or experienced, to face a quasi-dictatorship in our countries, for instance. But it's really the power of the numbers which will get us there. So that's why creating networks of global resistors, that's how I call them, people who challenge the status quo, who dare to break the rules for the sake of justice. This is very important because I'm living on an island. Madagascar is this big island in the Indian Ocean. Me and my friends, those who try to change things, we feel isolated because we are living on an island, disconnected from any kind of neighborhood. If we didn't have those networks of global resistors, we won't have been able to build this local resistance. It's a link between national, regional, and global struggles, sharing a common ground, the spirit of justice. These are three ways for me, like tackling this power imbalance, but also putting much pressure on the governance side. But we need also to be creative. I sense a kind of fatigue from resistors because it's very hard and it takes time to spring, revolution or really a change of mindset. While bad things like corruption flourish everywhere. And if we look at technology, progress, artificial intelligence, etc., there are so many tools that bad people can use in bad ways. Let's also reinvent ourselves and find creative ways to collaborate together to counterattack and to fight back.
So, what I understand is when we look, the democratic system is a broken system because it is led by power politics. And in the name of democracy, what I've been witnessing is actually autocracy. However, it may be camouflaged. And you are saying that one way to heal the system would be to have people who are awake in terms of, and it's people power which can heal the system.
Yes, definitely. We most of the time feel desperate when we are working in silos. You have the feeling that nothing is moving in the right direction. It's only through getting together and building this people power that we can feel the power of unity and start making change happen. This is the only way. Because otherwise, rulers and people fed with corruption will always find a way to make you struggle. They will make you struggle with basic problems. Here in Madagascar, for instance, more than 85% of the population are living in extreme poverty. That means less than $2 a day. People are just busy surviving. It's very difficult to mobilize them under issues of governance, corruption, etc., because they need to fill their belly first. I have the feeling that the rulers in many countries, especially in the global south, are using this extreme poverty to maintain the population and the citizens under their domination. They are keeping saying, yeah, let's keep those people out there so that they cannot rise, they cannot revolt, because they would still be looking for a bowl of rice a day. So what we need to do was exactly what you said. We need awake people. We need people to understand that in order to dream for better tomorrows, we need to take care of today. Taking care of today means understanding what is at stake and being ready, whatever the price, to claim our rights. And that's the essential need of organizing ourselves through movements. I know it is a long run game. It won't happen overnight. But I see springs of hope, sparkles of this change happening. Last year, for instance, we had protests in Kenya and elsewhere in Africa with Gen Z, really young people claiming for the rights and daring to challenge the power because they are convinced that there is something more just at what done they have, then all of it sparks hope.
Is the climate justice conversation still dominated by Western narratives? And how can we ensure that those most affected lead the dialogue?
So first thing is bringing the voices from people on the forefront. That means the victims of climate change to the global fora, because most of the time what we see is there is a lot of organizations speaking on behalf of communities, but who don't do that in an efficient way. Let's bring the real people who are struggling on the ground to battle for their rights. Let's empower them and let's make them heard. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to create a kind of consciousness within the global institutions on climate justice, to take into account that there is the majority of the global population who is struggling with climate change. It's not just a conversation of a few. It is not a big business, because that's also the sense I have most of the time, around COPs, for instance, of the UNFCCC Conference of State Parties. There are thousands of people attending each COP every year. But how much of those people are really people from the forefront, from the victim side? How many are there to conclude deals in the name of climate justice? Transparency International, for instance, we have recently produced, a report with the title Behind the Badge. How COP deals have been captured, by big oil. Last year, the COP was held in Azerbaijan, a country constantly violating human rights. It's a fossil fuel country. And most of those from governments and the private sector went there for concluding deals, while they were supposed to find ways to mitigate climate change. So there is this sense of greenwashing around the concept of climate justice and climate change, and we need to break this. I sense a start of, I would say, progress from the global north, from the West as well, if we can say, on the discourse. They are more sensitive to it. And this is partly thanks to the efforts made by the UN Secretary General to call on again and again on the involvement of consumer countries. That means those countries who consume the critical minerals and the resources from the global south, a consciousness of those countries to repair the damage that they have created, but also to think of new ways of consuming to reduce the demand. That's one of the ways as well to really tackle climate change and its bad effects. That's really one of those change and shift in the mindset that the UN Secretary General has been working on. And here I can't not mention the efforts of the late Pope Francis. Whether we are, Christian or not, we have to recognize that he was a leader in the domain of climate change. That means a new approach to how we deal with the environment, how we consume resources, and appealing to this responsibility, especially from the global north, responsibility in all the struggles linked to the environment. He made a great pledge around the Amazon, for instance, and his work is something which I also see like sparkling non-violent engagement, because his only weapon was his theory. Through the Laudato Si compendium that he wrote, he really sparked hope within the community of environmental defenders and fighters. This is something which is great. One of the things that I wanted to mention to you in our engagement within Publish What You Pay is that we want to break the harmful trade barriers to the energy transition. And we are targeting the World Trade Organization in doing so. For instance, that will answer the question on how at the global fora? How are we also triggering change within those big institutions who are shaping the rules? The fact is that right now, the trade rules that we have only favor the global north and the countries who are consuming natural resources and raw materials. We in Africa and in the global south are still struggling with intellectual property. Those intellectual property rights prevent the transfer of clean technologies to the global south, which will help us craft our own clean energy future. If we don't break these rules, then the injustice will persist. We are currently campaigning towards the World Trade Organization to allow what we call a TRIPS waiver. So it's a trade and internal property rights around those clean technologies. During the pandemic of COVID-19, for us to know, there was a TRIPS waiver around the vaccines because this was a global crisis. And the property shifted. Global South was allowed to really enjoy those vaccines. Why don't we do so now that we are facing another global crisis, which is climate change? Why don't we break those rules and allow the maximum of countries, regions, and people to enjoy those clean technologies? There are ways to influence global organizations, but it needs to be organized. It needs a heavy mobilization and creativity in the approach, but it's not mission impossible.
It's actually interesting. How can we ensure that the most affected, the people and the countries who are most affected by climate change, lead the dialogue and affect policy change? The holders of narratives are leading the narrative, and yet there is climate change. We are hurtling towards that point, which everybody or the large keeps screaming about across the world, definitely in the West, and yet we are hurtling faster and faster, which means the system is broken, there is corruption, and there is lack of intent. There's only cosmetic handling of the matter. So, coming back to this one line, how can we ensure that the most affected lead the dialogue? I remember you mentioned that was already a case in point amongst many other cases. This time the COP will be in Brazil. The damage already done in the Amazon, preparing for the COP. If we were to take a practical aspect, the upcoming COP, and the affected people, the communities, the indigenous people across the world who generally do not even have a voice at COP, they are in other rooms led by other people.
The first thing I would say is voice representation and taking the right people to the right place, avoiding intermediaries and uniting our resources to bring, for instance, indigenous peoples from various corners of the globe to the COPs. That's the first thing to do. Right now, as we will be part of the COP in Brazil, we are working in caucus with several global organizations to work on the People Summit, which will be featured at COP30. And through this People Summit, we are preparing already a resolution, preparing asks for those, like power holders or policymakers, decision makers from the globe who will be there. Really, if you want to strike the system, let's just think for a moment that the countries where the resources come from stop producing those resources for just one day in the year. If we went on strike, what will happen? Markets will collapse and because people only, resonate in economic terms if there is a crash economics in the auctions around energy, etc., people may listen. I'm very fond of those kind of extreme solutions and direct actions. But for the moment, we are starting to organize ourselves. Just for you, Minu, to know, it's not only on the African continent, but it's a global movement. We want to make things happen in Belém this year in November. We want to make a difference. What have we seen in the last COPs, for instance? There is always cosmetic conversations around the loss and damage fund. There has not been, concrete resolutions that have been taken to really go in the sense of fostering climate finance, which will be equitable and accessible to the victims of climate change. This year, we want to shift the narrative and to really break the status quo. Organization and mobilization is key, but people have also to really understand the mechanisms of international negotiations, such as the COPs. Most of the time, people are afraid of technicalities. This is complicated because this is finance. This is complicated because energy is so technical. But it is the role of civil society organizations around the world also to facilitate and to make the information edible for everybody, even illiterate audiences, indigenous people, or people who are really struggling on the ground. It's our role to channel the information in a double way. From the decision makers, taking it back to our villages, but also taking the information and the claims from our villages to the global voices and platforms, their claims out there. So I do agree that COP30 is a big occasion for us to make a difference. Part of the struggle is really this access to information. We also require a bottom-up, rights-based and power-aware approach. And part of the strategy, the key strategies to do so, is to recognize also the people who are affected by climate change as agents, not only victims. We have to start by acknowledging their lived expertise. People on the front lines of climate change, whether farmers facing drought, coastal dwellers losing land to rising seas, or indigenous groups defending forests, are not passive recipients of aid. They are already innovating, resisting, and adapting, and the task is to support and amplify their leadership. Another solution is the need to ensure access to transparent information, because people can't act if they don't know their rights or what's that happening. Demand, for instance, open data on all transactions, for instance, around extractive industry deals, climate finance mitigation funds. There are millions of dollars circulating around the globe, but people on the forefront don't know that. They have to understand the political economy of climate injustice, learn how decisions are made and how to influence them, and form alliances across movements. And when I say movements, it's about climate, labor, gender, land rights, etc. In the Philippines and Kenya, for instance, fisherfolk and smallholder farmers have successfully formed cooperatives to resist destructive extractive process and projects. So we can replicate this as a larger scale, I think. And one thing is also to create a safe civic spaces. In many places, environmental defenders face threats. Advocacy must include demands for protection, legal recognition of community leadership, and civic space guarantees. Last thing I will mention is that we need to shift resources. We need to shift the resources to the front lines. Climate finance must reach local groups directly, not just big NGOs or governments. We need to support climate funds and philanthropic mechanisms that are co-designed with affected communities, offer also flexible and long-term support, and prioritize gender justice and indigenous rights. And with all of this, I think there are ways to break the status quo. We need to celebrate wins and foster hope in our discourse. Sharing stories of successful local resistance, may it be, land won back, projects halted, or forests protected, they are needed to break fatalism. Resistance is contagious when people see that organizing works, and we are committed to that.
That's interesting. I like the line, resistance is contagious. And you mentioned something very important, safety, the safe space. Now, related to that, it is said that justice begins with truth, but truth can be dangerous in corrupt systems. So, how do you personally navigate the risks of challenging powerful interests? I mean, have there been moments you feared for your safety or freedom?
Yeah. So that's a crucial question. Justice doesn't come without costs. Let us be clear on that, but it shouldn't be. As human beings, we are guaranteed freedom, basic and fundamental freedoms, and safety. The right to safety is part of it. But we need to partner the first protection. And the way to ensure safety is speaking the truth with evidence. Most of the time, defenders are prosecuted, they are threatened with legal action because they are accused of being defamatory towards powerful interests. So this is what I learned from my experience with Transparency International. Never say something if you don't have evidence, because that evidence will be your first protection. So we are training, communities in fact-checking, for instance, in gathering evidence. We are providing safe platforms for people to blow the whistle to us, and then we do support the consequence when we are chasing the corrupt people, for instance. So this, I would say, legal literacy is a key, but also this technique of gathering evidence and systematically fact-checking. If you have doubts about something you are aware of, don't disclose it first. Protect yourself. The second thing is also to engage with platforms who are the specialists of defending defenders. Here, I'm saying, like Transparency International or Publish What You Pay, we are not humanitarian or human rights organizations. We don't have the capacity to protect our whistleblowers or defenders on the ground, but we do partner with other organizations who know how to handle those struggles. We are partnering with Amnesty International, with frontline defenders, and with other organizations who can trigger immediate response to threats across the globe. So I encourage people to build alliances with them, because that can spare a lot of lives. And third, I think we need to foster the spirit of courage. When you are in face of an injustice, no matter what the threats are, dare to speak up, dare to speak out. Acknowledge the risk, but don't retreat. Yes, truth can be dangerous. It threatens vested interests, exposes injustice, and disrupts comfortable lies. And most of the time, whistleblowers, journalists, and activists often pay a high price. But without truth, justice is impossible. Each and every one of us has a role to play. We must face danger with courage, not denial. I'd like to correct a little bit that framing the truth as dangerous can sometimes become an excuse for silence. So let's try to shape and change that narrative as well. Instead, we must name the risks, prepare for them, and build collective safety, creating networks of protection and solidarity, as I just enumerated. We have many organizations providing with emergency seed funding for activists in danger. We can also use strategic storytelling. Not all truth must be shouted all at once. We have to be strategic. In hostile environments, consider how, when, and by whom truth is told. This involves, protecting sources, centering lived experience without endangering vulnerable voices, and choosing momentum that maximize impact and minimize harm. So we have to be aware of all of those constraints. And we have also to practice care while demanding accountability, because justice should not come at the cost of the well-being of those fighting for it. Building a culture of care within activist spaces is a truly need. We need trauma-informed practices, and there are organizations who are specialized in that, mental health support, and shared leadership. Truth might be dangerous, but it must not become a source of burnout or despair. We have to use it to fuel our energy to change the world.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to bring across a very layperson's viewpoint to the word transparency as I would see it. Often is treated as a technical fix. For me, it boils down to ethic and attitude. If that attitude and ethic is inbuilt in human beings across the world, while they are growing up, in the societies they are growing up in homes and communities and education systems and the political systems, they are part of it, becomes natural. You're not having to inspire something at the base, it is already existing. So there is no resistance, there is expansion. At the present stage where we are, and what I see is a power political world, not only in terms of politics, but in normal people globally. The aspirations of a whole generation have changed. They have moved towards more materialism, but that will lead to a very different conversation. But having said that, they've moved outwards. The inward basic motivations have disappeared, which has led to mental health challenges and depressions. Individuals across the world have become outward oriented and they've become individuals. They've moved away from a we to an I. For me, it all boils down if I sit down in one corner and really go down to the basics. Where did it all begin and where can, because whatever fix we get from the outside, we will try to create transparent systems. They, again, if we see there's a cause and an effect, for example, um, 0 to 1 was the cause, and now the effect is what we are seeing at 10, for example. Now that we are trying to figure out how to tackle that 10 or the effect, if we had to get down to the root of it, in my humble opinion, it would be really going down to the basics and cutting right through, which is a very difficult thing. We are saying we need to affect thoughts of people globally to shape them while they are forming. What would you think?
That's really interesting. You should write a book on that topic, because root cause of these struggles and problems we face is the loss of the sense of the common good. It's the loss of the sense of community as well. It's really this individualism. Individualism can be a good thing in the sense of self-empowerment, right? In feeling my voice matter, I can influence, not only my life, but how things are shaped in my societies. The word I is not a taboo one, but it has to be used in the right framework and at the right momentum. But the we, that really has to be the fundamental aspect of our engagement. So we need to bring back, especially the current generation, from that selfishness and that greedy materialistic perspective back to the basics, as you say. It's all about moral, ethics. What is integrity? Integrity, for instance, is doing the right thing at each and every moment, even if no one is asking or looking at you. That's integrity. And it's deeply. I do believe it is deeply incremented in each of us, but our societal environment distorts and corrupts that genuinity of the we, of the spirit of collectivity. So, but it is reversible. What I would suggest is first to reclaim and reframe the narrative. The dominant story today is you are what you own. And self-care is more important than community care. But to reverse this, we must tell a better story. One where meaning is found in connection, contribution, and purpose. So let's start asking ourselves, what makes life worth living? What kind of ancestors do we want to be for the future generations? Movements, media, and education must challenge the myth of the self-made person and uplift the value of interdependence. And then we also need to create opportunities for collective action so that people rediscover the we when they act together toward a shared goal. Not when they're told to care, but when they experience care in action. We have many examples of that. Community cleanups and mutual aid during crisis, for instance, that's a good thing that is happening around the world. Participatory budgeting in neighborhoods or student cooperatives and worker-owned businesses, climate strikes that center intergenerational solidarity. These aren't abstract. They make solidarity tangible and emotionally fulfilling. That's how I see it. And this fulfillment is essential to counter the dopamine hits of individualistic consumerism. That's really key and crucial. And we need to teach interdependence from a young age, because children aren't born individualistic. They learn it. Schools, families, and media must reorient toward teaching, systems thinking, how we are all connected. Also, emotional intelligence and empathy. This is key. And finally, I think we need to lead by example for shifting the leadership model. Let's celebrate and support leaders who serve, not dominate. Those who center humility, listening, community benefit, and justice. Leadership based on empathy and moral courage, not status or branding. This can help reset values. Think of leaders like Nelson Mandela or Wangari Maathai, for instance, or even today's youth activists who speak of we more than me or I. We're on the right path, but we need to accelerate that.
Wonderful. That means on the same page. I'm really always glad to know a fellow person who's on the same page. And this podcast does live in that space between institutions and people and trying to bridge that I-ness to a we-ness, if I could say. I liked what you said, and I totally abide by that. Instead of being told, and because when you are told something, your action will just end at the next action. That's it. However, if you're inspired from within, it's part of your DNA. Your thoughts, continuous thoughts across life, as well as your words and actions would continue as a continuum to be coming from a place of inspiration. So it boils down to the basics. So I totally agree with you, which you took my thought forward. It's the shaping of the entire narrative globally, which needs to be done, because I do believe the narrative is at the bottom of it all. People worldwide across social media talk about organizations and education system in the entire world. That narrative has changed. And if we tweak that narrative, that is where I would foresee long-lasting change only then. Till that point, we are only tweaking the effect. constantly trying to make little dents in the effect. And if we just go to the cause, I think when we go to the cause, I literally see a mountain falling. And when I say we are trying to make dents in the narrative, or not in the narrative, in the effect, I'm talking about trying to chisel a dent in a mountain. This is what I see when I see a visual.
That's fantastic, Minu. That's a great plan. Now I'm starting to see the mountain falling as well. Thank you so much for that.
We always end with hope because that's where all the revolution begins. So, gives you hope right now, even in the face of climate breakdown, democratic backsliding, corporate capture? What gives you hope?
That's the power of resistance which gives me hope. The sparkles of this people power is a reality. It's not just a theory. It's beyond the books, beyond teachings. I can feel it. I'm touching it every day. In the conversations, in the plans that we are building with resistors across the world, I know that there will be a better tomorrow, and it's not far. We will be struggling this year, maybe next year, but there is a light after the tunnel, Minu. I'm believing in it. And when I look at my 4 kids, which is almost a whole basketball team, and they are fueling this energy to me. They are my sparkles of hope as well. I want to build a better place for them. What will be our legacy? Are we going to leave a destroyed planet to our kids and our grandkids? We can do better. We can do more. Let's keep it kicking every day.
Thank you for being there and sharing your thoughts, your opinions, and your journey. And thank you for being there. What are you dreaming into reality right now? What's next for you before we end?
What's next for me is really concrete because we have adopted a new strategy within Publish What You Pay. We are soon becoming the Resource Justice Network. We have rebranded to fit more with our vision and ambition. It's really fighting for shared prosperity on a thriving planet, making it a reality. At COP30, during the New York Climate Week, everywhere across the globe, starting from here in Madagascar, my home place. Thank you for having me and for sparking this conversation, Minu.
Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Minu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.